you were fairly adamant.
You're listening to the Rethinking Hell podcast, where evangelical Christians discuss what the Bible says about hell and put conventional and controversial views to the test. To continue the discussion and find more resources on this topic, you can visit us online at www.rethinkinghell.com.
Hello and welcome back. This is Chris Date, and thanks for joining us for another episode of the Rethinking Hell podcast. If you haven't listened to episode 4, in which Dr. Glenn Peoples gave his positive case for annihilationism or conditional immortality, I'd encourage you to go back and give it a listen. If you're not yet terribly familiar with why we believe the Bible teaches the final and irreversible destruction of the unsaved rather than their eternal torment, Glenn's presentation will serve as a very helpful introduction, and I think you'll walk away recognizing that while you might disagree with us, we nevertheless have biblical reasons for believing what we do. Now, if you did listen, you might recall that I had said that I'd be back in the next episode to respond to common objections to our view, but we decided to change things up a bit and postpone that episode. Instead, this week and next, we'll play parts 1 and 2 of my recent interview with Dr. Preston Sprinkle, who co-authored Erasing Hell with Francis Chan. If you've read Erasing Hell, you might be wondering why it is that Dr. Sprinkle is appearing on our show. In light of the fact that the book, although much more fair in its treatment of our view of hell than many other books, it does ultimately land on the side of the traditional view. Well, I'm not going to answer that question for you. You'll have that question answered for you soon enough, and I won't make you wait any longer. So let's move right into the interview. I'm joined today by Dr. Preston Sprinkle, Associate Professor of Biblical Studies at Eternity Bible College. Dr. Sprinkle is author or co-author of a few books, including one with particular relevance to us here at rethinkinghell.com, Erasing Hell, which he co-authored with Francis Chan. Dr. Sprinkle joins me to talk about the book, what he discovered in the process of writing it, and about how his view might have changed a little bit since then. Thanks so much for being here today, Dr. Sprinkle.
That's good to be here, Chris. Thanks for having me.
As I mentioned a moment ago, you're a professor at Eternity Bible College. Can you tell us a little bit about Eternity and why some of our listeners might want to consider them for their education?
Yeah, Eternity Bible College started by Francis Chan and the elders at Cornerstone Church, I think around the year 2003, so it's a fairly young college. A couple unique emphases is, one, we believe that school debt is a terrible thing and that there actually doesn't have to be school debt, so we charge basically whatever it costs to keep the lights on at the school. That's how much we charge to students to go there. So tuition is incredibly cheap, and we haven't had a student yet graduate with any sort of debt. So that's a big emphasis. Another one is just that it's very much focused on not teaching people what to think as much as teaching them how to think. So we don't indoctrinate our students. We absolutely saturate them in the Bible. Almost every course is some sort of Bible course, and we hope that their view of God would arise from the text. Is as free as from presupposition as you can get. Of course,
sure,
there's going to be nagging things that tell you that you want to believe certain things, but it's rigorous in as far as studying the text of Scripture and the students are cranking out, man. They're zealous for Christ, and it's a really, really cool place. I'm so excited to be there.
Well, I hope my listeners will check it out, and I'll be sure to include a link in the show notes so that they can find your website online. But as a way to get us to help us get inside your mind, so to speak, what do you teach at Eternity, and what are the titles and topics of some of your other published works?
Yeah, interesting. I teach mainly Old Testament classes. I teach Old Testament Survey 1 and 2. I teach a New Testament backgrounds class, which is largely focused on the intertestamental period. I teach various book studies, Isaiah, Chronicles, Ezra, Nehemiah, what else? Ezekiel I've taught before. So that's kind of my main area of teaching is Old Testament, but my PhD was actually in New Testament. But I actually enjoy teaching the Old Testament more. I just think it's just fascinating. So some of my other books have been focused on New Testament or the Jewish background of the New Testament. That's really where my primary, I guess, expertise is first century Judaism. So a lot of my more scholarly writings that most people have never heard of are really focused on individual Jewish books and pieces of literature from around the first century, and how it kind of correlates with Paul's writings as well.
Very interesting. Well, we're going to talk in a moment about Erasing Hell. But first, before you and Francis began working on the book, where did you stand in terms of the hell debate and why?
Yeah, I didn't know there was much of a debate. I grew up like any evangelical Christian, just believing that the term hell was synonymous with burning with literal fire forever and ever. And never really. I was always kind of troubled by it. I mean, quite honestly, whenever I went out, to roast s'mores, whatever, I would literally, even to this day, kind of stare at the fire and just imagine 5 minutes of that sort of agony, let alone eternity, and just be really troubled and bewildered by it, but didn't even think beyond that. Just kind of thought, wow, that's horrible. I hope I don't go there.
Yeah.
So I didn't have a lot of awareness of the discussion at all. But both Francis and I said, when we actually sat down at the first stage of writing, and I kind of said, hey, so what are your kind of base assumptions? What are your sort of, things that are kind of no-brainers when we're studying this, and what are some things that are kind of open to debate? And, he was kind of listing off some stuff, and he actually listed, eternal, that it's everlasting torment or whatever. And I said, this is like a couple weeks into the process. I just want you to know, Francis, that duration is not nearly as clear as I thought it was. And would you be open to playing with that a little bit? And he was kind of shocked. He's like, really? And Francis is such a genuine interpreter of the Bible. He is truly willing to go where the text leads him. So he was a little kind of shocked at that, but he's like, hey man, let's show me what you got. Let's get at this, and if it's not that clear, then we can't go beyond what Scripture says. So
yeah.
So it was an interesting journey for both of us.
Yeah. Well, we'll talk about that a little bit more, but continuing with this, early on in the writing of the book's process, in the book, Francis says that the book was written with his voice, but that most of the research was done by you. How did you come to work together with him on the book, and why did he seek your help?
Yeah, that's a long story. Let me try and shorten it. He was getting just asked a ton of questions, especially in the wake of Rob Bell's book. I mean, some of it was directly related to Rob Bell, but others were just questions related to hell and other things. This is, obviously a lot of discussion going on. And so we had been talking, so he contacted me and just wanted to talk. I'd done some blogs on Love Wins. And so we were talking through the issue, and he was kind of thinking about writing maybe a shorter paper or doing a YouTube video or something. And I said, I don't know. I mean, there's enough to talk about that would demand a book. I feel like it's a topic that so many people are thinking through. I said, I think it would be worthy to do a book. And his immediate reaction was, I don't have time just to crank out a book right now. I mean, that takes a lot of time. And I said, well, hey, I would love to help you as much as you need to on this. I feel like, I'm familiar with kind of the area that would need to be studied, and I could very easily, do a lot of research. I mean, a lot of the research, in a sense, is just over the years, it's kind of done. But so we, he got excited about that, and I just feel like it would be a very good team. I mean, both of us felt that both of us have very, very, very similar passions about Scripture, about God, but both of us are very, very different gifts as well. So we just immediately thought that this would be a very good team together, and it really worked out great. I have no complaints at all. I mean, it was a wonderful process.
Yeah. It sounds to me like it would have been something I'd enjoy to have worked on as well. So I can relate. Now, you mentioned that you were kind of surprised to discover early on in the process of researching this that the debate was a little more complex than maybe you guys originally thought. And in fact, Chan writes in the book, the debate about hell's duration is much more complex than I first assumed. But the book does ultimately land in favor of the traditional view, and Chan goes on to write, while I lean heavily on the side that says it is everlasting, I'm not ready to claim that with complete certainty.
Yeah.
Were you also surprised? Well, we kind of already answered that question, but when the book was published, would you have likewise said that you leaned toward the traditional view?
I would say, yeah, I lean towards the traditional view, based on, I think we're going to talk in a little bit about those three passages, and basically what it came down to for me, and I'm still, wrestling through all this stuff.
Sure.
It came down to most of the passages suggest an annihilation view, but don't demand it. A lot of the language of destruction and other things. And yet there's 3 passages that I found that in and of themselves seem to point towards an everlasting view. And given the fact that the first century Jewish context allowed for both, then that was kind of my logical reasoning, that if you're a first century Jew or Jewish Christian, you could go either way on the duration. A lot of these passages that seem to point towards annihilation didn't demand it, but they suggested it, but then those three others kind of pushed tip the scales in favor of everlasting view. And that was it. I mean, we wrote the book. We felt like we needed to get it out there. But I was like, man, this is the beginning of a study. This is not the end at all. Because there's a lot of things that, while that was my view at that point, I was like, these texts, especially the ones in Revelation, demand a lot more attention. So yeah, that's kind of where we're at.
Yeah, I understand. And we're certainly going to talk about those 3 texts here in a little bit.
Sure.
But let's talk a little bit more about the book first, because one of my friends and fellow conditionalists, he wrote a brief review at his blog after he read the book and had some really great things to say about it, even though the book does ultimately conclude differently from us. He wrote, for example, the authors approach the issue with a level of humility, care, and sensitivity, which, as I was reading, genuinely struck me as uncontrived, and my phoniness detector is fine-tuned. Now, I can relate to that. We conditionalists, we often feel like other books about this topic that discuss our view do so without, this kind of humility and care. So I'm curious, have you received this kind of feedback as well about your book? And why do you think that it's important that we discuss differing views on this topic with the kind of humility that you and Chan aimed for?
That's a great question. And honestly, I got so annoyed and frustrated at all the books and articles that were supporting a traditionalist view. It irritated me to no end. Like, it just seemed very, and I'm definitely not going to name any names, but it's very heartless. They were, ranting and almost like they were angry about people who would disagree with their view. And I was like, we're talking about souls here. Like, do you realize you're talking about real people here? Like, this, you can't just, and it angered me because these are like evangelical writers and talking about what they think is a doctrine. This ain't no doctrine. This is either it's real or it's not. And if it's real, we have to study this with tears and agony, and whichever view, either view is miserable. Really. So, and then when I would read a lot of the conditionalist argument or just the literature as a whole, I just arrogance bleeds on both sides, but but it did seem more sensitive. It seemed like I feel like I just felt more heart involved in it, and a willingness, really, especially from evangelicals, to take a view that they may get some flack for. And it was really, there's an article by a new Southern Baptist New Testament scholar named Earl Ellis, and he wrote just a brief article defending the conditionalist view, and I read that early on, and I was kind of, that was at the point where I was gonna, I wanted to read it so that I can kind of show why it's wrong and everything. But every argument he gave, I couldn't argue against it. I was like, oh my gosh, he's bringing up a lot of points I never considered. And then I kind of read some rebuttals, and they were very weak. And I was like, this view, this is, there's some stuff here that really people need to wrestle with, and it's sad that their presuppositions and upbringing and fear really is so secure, and that it may actually prevent many people from even opening up the question.
Sure.
Disappointing, but
yeah, definitely. I can definitely relate to the very experience that you just described. I went through a very similar process. Now, my friend went further to praise your book, saying that what struck me over and over again was the fact that Chan and Sprinkle get things right that many big-name traditionalist scholars get wrong, unquote. And he lists several examples of this. So I want to talk about a couple of them. One of them is traditionalist authors sometimes claim that first-century Jews were sort of monolithic in their belief in eternal torment. But as you've mentioned, sort of hinted at a couple of times here, that's not what you found in your research, is it?
Not at all. No. Yeah, I mean, I could give you specific references in Jewish documents that are very clearly annihilationist. In fact, that logic shows that whoever said that doesn't know anything about Judaism, because I mean, a lot of Jews didn't have a firm belief in an everlasting afterlife at all.
Like the Sadducees, for example, right?
Like the Sadducees, even the Essenes. There's debate about what their view of the afterlife was, and all across the Dead Sea Scrolls, you have, and this would be interesting if there's a listener out there looking for a dissertation topic. I think there's much work to be done on the language that the Dead Sea Scrolls use of I don't want to use the term hell because they don't, but afterlife punishment, because the language is very close to the New Testament. In fact, it uses phrases like eternal destruction, and but in the context, very clearly, it is they are annihilationists through and through. The Dead Sea Scrolls. There's no real clear evidence that they believed in an everlasting torment. And as you know, some of you out there may know, I mean, the parallels in thinking and in theological concepts between the Dead Sea Scrolls and the New Testament is very, very close. So, that would be one corpus of literature that we have from around the first century that would very clearly be annihilationists, and they're sort of, the Jewish sort of brothers of the New Testament as far as their theological thinking goes. So, it's definitely not there's really no debate about that. There is diversity in the literature. Both views are very clearly there.
You say there's no debate, but that might surprise people that read Robert Morey and have read nothing since, because no offense to Robert Morey, but 20 years ago, when he wrote his book, he made the claim, I think, that it was monolithic. So, people might be surprised to hear that. But, another example that my friend gives of how you and Chan got things right is your admission in the book that, quote, expressions like eternal fire, unquenchable fire, and undying worm do not obviously denote everlasting suffering, unquote. And that's, of course, the quote from my friend. But can you explain for those listeners who might be surprised by it why it is that those expressions are more ambiguous than perhaps many traditionalists think?
Well, there's several reasons. Let's take the everlasting fire. First of all, there's the problem with the word everlasting, which the more I studied that Greek word, which is the adjective aionios, that's just a very, very complicated word. And I don't think it clearly means, I mean, this is going to sound weird, but I don't think it clearly means anything. Like, I don't think you can say it clearly means everlasting, or it clearly means, of the age, some people would say. You have to take it almost in each individual context. The word is very flexible, was used very widely. So that's just a major problem there, what the word everlasting means in the phrase everlasting fire. Then let's just say it is, speaking of duration, well, that's not saying the act of punishing is everlasting, it just means the fire is. So what does that mean? Well, it could mean that the punishment is so final it can't be reversed, if it's, and the fire will last forever, or then you got to deal with the whole idea of is the fire literal? Well, it's hard to take the fire literal when you have other images of outer darkness and gloom and fire, produces light. Last time I saw fire, so there's just all sorts of, when you really think hard about all these images, it just seems that they are images. Like much of the Bible produces, it speaks in imagery to convey a point, but we're not supposed to take that image literal. The fire one, the everlasting one, the undying worm comes from Isaiah 66. Now, again, we have to ask, what's that image speaking of? I grew up thinking that in hell, worms are going to be crawling in and out of your it reminds me of a scene from Indiana Jones where there's a snake coming out of the guy's
right.
So the image comes from Isaiah, and Isaiah clearly in that context wasn't speaking of everlasting punishment. I guess there's always a debate about stuff like that, but to my mind, it just doesn't seem like he's speaking about any sort of everlasting punishment. So it seems that when the New Testament writers use an image that comes from the Old Testament, we have to go back to that Old Testament passage and say, what is that image originally communicating? And again, I don't think he's speaking of a literal worm. I think he's I think that image itself speaks of the irreversibility of the punishment without specifying the duration. So,
right.
Yeah, but when you grow up with the view cemented in your mind that the word hell means everlasting punishment, which is what a lot of us grew up with, then those images aren't even explored. They're just assumed. And that's,
It's sort of like reading the Bible through eternal torment colored glasses. You know, you're raised to believe it, so when you read a text, automatically that's what you read it as. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. It is interesting how firmly embedded that view is without people. I mean, it's in almost every doctrinal statement I read that the specifying the duration of hell is there, and I want to ask them, have you really looked into that? I mean, that's fine. I respect that, but it just seems that if they believe in hell, therefore they believe in eternal punishment, which it doesn't have to be the case.
Right. Well, there are other examples that my friend gives that I'd love to talk about, but in the interest of time, I'm just going to encourage our listeners to check out the book, regardless of which side of the debate they fall in, because the point is, for a variety of reasons, Erasing Hell is a very good book if people want a humble, careful look at hell and how it is understood by both conditionalists and traditionalists. But here's where perhaps the interview will begin to get a little bit more interesting, because although before the book and when the book was published, like Chan, you lean toward the traditional view, I don't get the impression that that's the case any longer. So where do you find yourself now, and what, since the publishing of Erasing Hell, has gotten you there?
Yeah, I would say, how would I phrase it? I would say I lean towards annihilation now. Now I'm not, there's those three passages I still want to deal with. Now, a couple of them aren't as strong as I originally thought, and I'm sure we'll get there. But it's just, if you were to pile up all the evidence, I don't have, 10 arguments for annihilation and 0 for eternal punishment, but I have something like 7 for annihilation and 3 for eternal punishment that carry legitimate weight. I mean, those numbers are fictitious, but
sure.
That's where I would say, and I don't know. I mean, I always wrestle with, do I need to solve all the issues so it's 10 and 0, say I believe in it, or is that enough to say that's where I'm leaning? But I think also, given the sensitivity of something like that, I need to really work through to where I feel, secure in my own mind before I start proclaiming that very widely. But I'm not one to hide what I believe. Again, going back to my college, one of the blessings of working at a school like that is there's no like weird doctrinal statement that threatens my job at all.
Sure.
You just be biblical, love Jesus, preach the gospel, and we'll keep you on here. So there's no threat from my church, from my family, there's nothing like that that's pressuring me to hold on to a traditional view. I just, I'm kind of a slow thinker in a sense that I don't mind taking a few years to really work through something before I ultimately land. So to come back to your question, I would say I lean towards annihilation.
I understand. And of course, we shouldn't, overnight change our view just because we found a few persuasive arguments. So I totally hear where you're coming from. And what's more is, this view has been so, such the majority view for 1,800 years or 1,500 years or whatever, that it makes sense to be very careful, as part of the transition. But I'm curious, have you shared your newfound lean toward conditionalism with many others, either privately or in public? And if you have, what sort of reactions have you received?
Yeah, I have. In fact, I did an Erasing Hell conference. When was that? Back in April last year at a church and a school. It was in Arkadelphia, Arkansas, at a Baptist church there. And then also I did a seminar at the school. And I was very open, just like I am now with my view. And interestingly, most of the people, I would almost say all the people that asked questions and responded were much more happy with the annihilation view. The Baptist church was kind of an older generation Baptist church. It wasn't, I would say it would be it wasn't a conservative church. It was more moderate. But the pastor seemed very, very adamant about annihilation. At least he seemed to be that as a stronger view. And almost everybody that I talked to seemed very supportive of that view. In fact, when I then switched it around and tried to argue for everlasting punishment, or at least present those arguments. I feel like I got more pushback on that than the others. So that was one where it was very public. Private conversations usually go well, especially if somebody knows me. They know that I'm, for the most part, genuinely trying to go where Scripture leads, and
Sure.
And I've got, I'm kind of a mixed bag. I mean, I've got a lot of what people would traditionally call conservative views on certain things, and other things that people say are more liberal or whatever. I don't even like those terms, but so I think people don't even know where to put me, but they do know that I genuinely seek out the text, and I'm honestly trying to go where Scripture leads. And so in a private conversation, I feel like that generally, that usually goes pretty well. So yeah, I haven't had anything thrown at me yet, and yeah.
That's good. And I'm glad to hear that your church membership and your tenure at Eternity Bible College isn't endangered by this. But let's move on then to these three texts that we've referred to a few times that are sort of, they still cause you pause. So share with us what those three texts are, and then maybe we'll go through them one by one. And I'll be honest, I'm going to try and tilt the direction, or tilt you even further to annihilation. I'm going to try to persuade you, but before I do, share these three texts for us and why it is that they give you pause.
Okay, just briefly, the first one is Matthew 25. The specific verse is 25, verse 46. The passage as a whole goes from 25, 31 to 46, and this is probably the main one, and it talks about those going away into eternal punishment, but the righteous will go into eternal life. It's clearly in an afterlife, post judgment context, and it's the contrast between eternal life, eternal punishment. If eternal life is speaking about everlasting life, then it would suggest that the punishment is as well. Let me just give a little caveat. It's been about a year since I looked at the specific textual issues here, so you probably will persuade me. I don't know if I have enough ammunition. So I do remember, that this argument the argument towards a traditional view kind of hangs on, one, again, understanding the word aionios, which is translated eternal. It demands that is speaking of the duration of life, of duration as a whole. And it also demands that when there's a contrast, it has to be equal, in better terms. And I do know, just from Greek language as a whole, that's not always true. So I don't think it's a bulletproof argument. Since there's a contrast, therefore it's everlasting punishment, end of story. I don't think that at all. I've seen examples where you have a similar contrast where it's not. The one side of the contrast doesn't demand the flip side on the other.
Sure.
The other passages come from Revelation. I've got a phone here. I'm looking at my Bible, so I'm trying to. But it's the reference is Revelation 14 verses 9 to 11.
Right.
This is one that conditionalists, the late conditionalists, what's his name, Clark Pinnock, said that this is probably the strongest passage against his view. Towards strongest passage towards a traditional view. And there it doesn't just use the word eternal, but it speaks of. I'm just going to kind of from memory.
Sure.
Refers to the fire of the torment going up forever and ever. It kind of expands. It's not just the word forever. It actually expands on that quite a bit through different images. But it doesn't, if I remember correctly, it doesn't just refer to the fire of the torment lasting forever, but I think it actually refers directly to the torment. We can look at.
Sure.
Now, my pushback to myself there is, A, it's actually talking about hell. It's not crystal clear. B, we're now entering into the realm of apocalyptic literature in the book of Revelation, and that I think that you can't just quote that passage and move on. You have to understand apocalyptic literature and how it works and the imagery. In the same passage, it also says that they're going to be suffering in the presence of Christ. Now that all sorts of other weird, I thought people in hell are banished from the presence of Christ. 2 Thessalonians 1. So that whichever view you take, that passage has a lot of complications to it. The third one is Revelation 12:10 to 15.
20, 10 to 15.
Yeah, 20, 10 to 15. Where it talks about, was it the devil and the false prophet being thrown into the lake of fire where they will suffer forever and ever. And then it also says in 2015 that all the unrighteous will be into the lake of fire. It doesn't say they will suffer forever and ever. Now that's, I think that's a big, a detail, a very important detail, that it doesn't specifically say that the unrighteous will suffer forever and ever. Only the devil and the false prophet. Now, the assumption is, well, they're both going to the same place, and, we can assume that they're both going to suffer the same fate. That is an assumption.
Yeah.
And so I think, honestly, of those three, that text, I can easily get around that one. That one's pretty weak, I think. It just doesn't, I don't think it's clear either way. So, yeah, those are the three that come to mind. I know a lot of people would have a lot more, but those are the...
No, I appreciate that. And, it's funny, the friend that I've, continued to refer to, he's come to call these the big three, and it's similar to other debates within Christendom where one side has, a few specific texts that, are repeatedly turned to. So you said that this one is for you, this last one that you mentioned, Revelation 20, is probably the least... the most ambiguous from your perspective. So maybe we can start with this one because, like I said, I want to try to persuade you, and I don't mean that to say that I want you to give me an answer, that I want you to, say here on the air, oh, I'm a conditionalist now. That's not it. But I would like to know how you, as somebody who still struggles with these verses,
sure,
what you would say in response to the case I'm about to make.
Okay.
So let's talk about this first one. Now, as you already pointed out, this is apocalyptic imagery. Sometimes we conditionalists are accused of taking the language figuratively, but actually it's much more than figurative language. That John is seeing pictures, and these pictures represent something, but are not intended to be taken literally any more than a beast with 7 heads and 10 horns that looks like a leopard, a bear, and a lion is supposed to be taken literally, right?
Right.
So the question I ask is, it seems to me that we shouldn't be just sort of taking it at face value as if the imagery is supposed to be taken literally. Instead, we should see first if there are any indicators that should indicate for us how this should be interpreted. Uh-huh. And for me, there are 3 reasons in this case why this imagery here actually, I think, leans far better toward conditionalism than toward the traditional view. And the first of which, and I'm sure you're aware of this, it's not only the beast, the false prophet, and the devil who are thrown into the fire and the risen unsaved, it's also death and Hades. But of course, death and Hades are abstract entities. They're not actual creatures, they're not actual things, they're abstractions, incapable of being tormented in reality to begin with. And yet in the imagery, John sees them thrown into the fire. And what I would ask somebody is, what do you think death and Hades being thrown into the fire is intended to communicate? So I would ask you that. Yeah. What do you think?
Oh, right, yeah. Yeah, I mean, death just being death, the reality that people die, and Hades being the intermediate state where, the wicked go. I don't know if I would say just because there's non-personal entities being thrown in there, that demands that the personal entities no longer carry their...
Sure, okay. But it sounds like what you're saying is, and I would agree with this, that at least death and Hades, being in impersonal entities, come to an end. That's what they're being thrown into the fire communicates. Is that
sure?
Fair?
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah.
So now, at least we know that some things thrown into the fire can come to an end rather than be tormented for eternity. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, anybody who is very, very familiar with Old Testament imagery, I think, would identify the beast that's described in chapter 13 as having 7 heads and 10 horns, and like I said, features of a leopard, a bear, and a lion. Mm-hmm. This all would hearken the reader back to Daniel 7, and the vision that he had of the 4 beasts, the first of which looked like a leopard, I think, and the second one like a bear, and the third like a lion. And then this 4th beast with 10 horns, it devours and consumes the previous 3 beasts, and then it's slain, and its body is thrown into the river of fire to be destroyed. So it's very clear how similar this imagery is, and I think many interpreters recognize that to some extent or another, the imagery communicates the same thing, even though on the surface of it, different things are happening in the imagery. And of course, we have Daniel 2 with the statue in Nebuchadnezzar's dream, where the four different parts of the statue, and then the rock comes and destroys them all. And in both of Daniel 2 and Daniel 7, whatever happens to this fourth kingdom represented in the imagery is followed by the reign of the kingdom of the reigning saints, which of course we see in the millennium, during which the beast and the false prophet are in the fire, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so with all that in mind, I think it's important to note that when Daniel asks the angel in Daniel 7 what the fate of the beast, where it's slain and its body is thrown into the fire, what it represents, the angel says in verse 26 that the beast's dominion will be taken away, annihilated, and destroyed forever. That's the NASB. And so the point is, it seems that the angel interprets the imagery for us, saying that whatever the fate of the beast is in the imagery, or the fourth part of the statue in Daniel 2, what it represents is a kingdom coming to an end, not any particular individuals being, suffering in a fire forever. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So it would seem to me that if that's the interpretation given to us in Daniel 7, and if the case can be made that these three chapters, Daniel 2, Daniel 7, and Revelation 20, are all communicating the same events but using slightly different imagery, then we should allow the divine interpretation in Daniel 7 to guide our interpretation of Revelation 20 and sort of just speculating on our own. And what that would suggest to me then is that the beast being tormented in the fire is a symbol representing the kingdom represented by the beast coming to an end. So that's my second thing. In other words, the beast is not supposed to be the beast is also an impersonal entity. It's a dominion. But the third thing, and this to me is very clear, although many people would disagree with me, is that twice, at least in the book of Revelation, the lake of fire is interpreted for us. And maybe many people sort of skip over this. But toward the end of Revelation 20, John calls the lake of fire the second death. And then in Revelation 21, the one sitting on the throne calls it the second death. So we know what the first death is. It's dying. It would seem then that the second death would be dying again.
Yeah.
So what do you make of this three-tiered argument? In other words, let me be very clear. I think in the imagery, and not every conditionalist will agree with me here, I think in the imagery, John is in fact seeing the eternal torment of the beast, the false prophet, and the devil, as well as death and Hades and the risen wicked. But the question is, given these three reasons, that death and Hades are thrown into the fire, that Daniel 7, the angel interprets the imagery to mean the end to a kingdom, and third, that John and the one on the throne call it the second death, do you think that there could be a persuasive case here that these three indicators give us reason to interpret the imagery as communicating annihilation?
So wait, let's go back. How are you understanding in 2010 that they will be tormented day and night forever and ever? You're saying...
I think John is literally seeing, in the imagery, the eternal torment day and night of the devil, the beast, and the false prophet, in the imagery.
And what is that imagery pointing to? Like, yeah, I mean, I understand it's imagery, but imagery, non-literal imagery, still is pointing towards a reality,
Absolutely, but Daniel 7, this is why I go back to Daniel 7 in one of these 3 points. In Daniel 7, the fate of the beast is different. It doesn't suffer for eternity. Instead, it's slain, and its dead body is thrown into the fire where it's destroyed. But the angel tells us what that imagery means. And the angel tells us that what it means is that the kingdom represented by that beast comes to an end. Its dominion is taken away. So you ask, what does the imagery in Revelation 20:10 mean? Well, I think we should allow the scripture to interpret it for us, and the angel in Daniel 7 tells us what it means.
Yeah, I would say I don't know if I would find that one too convincing me, because I don't know, I feel like the direction could be flipped. Like I don't know if I would want to just across the board go back to the Old Testament, and whatever the Old Testament means, you bring that back to the New Testament to redefine or to define what the New Testament means. It seems like it could go the other way, that Revelation is taking what is in its base form in Daniel, but then expanding upon that. And even in Daniel, like, I wouldn't, in a sense, of course, Daniel wouldn't talk about, well, I mean, you did leave out Daniel 12, where in the end, after judgment, after the earthly reign has been ended, they're actually raised to some are raised to eternal life, some are raised to eternal contempt. So Daniel doesn't end in chapter 9. There still is, more to be said within that.
Indeed, there is a lot more to say about Revelation 20, Daniel 7, and the other two passages that Dr. Sprinkle mentioned. And we said a lot more, which you'll get to hear in part 2 of the interview next week. In the meantime, you might recall that at the end of last episode, I read our first 2 iTunes reviews, and since then, we've received another one. Unless I've missed one hidden somewhere in the many iTunes countries, this is our second U.S. review and our third worldwide. Waldensian7 gives us 5 stars and writes, "Just finished part 1 of 4 and found it to be refreshing in how folks are looking at the evidence and laying aside previous prejudices. No need to ever be prejudiced, but let the freeing truth set one and all free." Well, thank you, Waldensian. We definitely think that's what we're doing, laying aside preconceived notions of hell and letting the biblical evidence guide us. And we appreciate that it seems to you that that's what we're doing. I'd like to encourage the rest of you listening as well to write up an iTunes review, assuming you have good things to say, of course. Just search for Rethinking Hell in the iTunes store. And remember, too, that you can find the blog, podcast, and forum and join in the conversation at www.rethinkinghell.com. And you can follow us on Twitter at RethinkingHell. And please do join us next week for part 2 of the interview with Dr. Sprinkle. Until then...